Welcome to the Hired Geek Podcast, where each week we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade focused on student support and digital experiences. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify podcast network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome, everyone, to another special live episode of the Hired Geek Podcast here at South by Southwest EDU in Austin, Texas. This is our final interview on site. We're at the end of the week. We're here with Anna. If you want to briefly introduce yourself as we're getting this episode started, can I just give a brief overview of your professional background and your current work? Because you do kind of a collection of things, so I'm kind of excited to hear all about all of them and how they kind of all intersect.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I love being here. I am Anna Homayoun, and for the last 25 years, I've worked with students on executive functioning skills. And so that's the basis for my work. I have a private company, Green Ivy Educational Consulting, and I also have a nonprofit initiative, Luminaria Learning, where we are working to bring this work into schools, because I'm very much a believer that all kids need this work, and it is the key to academic well-being, mental health, and economic mobility. I've been the author of 4 books. My most recent book is called Erasing the Finish Line, The New Blueprint for Success Beyond Grades and College Admission. I'm really excited about that book, in part because I went back and I interviewed my students from 15 years ago who were in my first few books, and they're now in their early 30s. So to be able to chat with them, to be able to hear their stories and what are the fundamental skills they've needed to succeed beyond, these grades, test scores, and college admission is just been really rewarding.
I saw your book was in the bookstore, and just I guess putting that out there into this sort of environment, because you're saying, I think with executive functioning skills, and we can kind of briefly define that to make sure everyone's on the same page after this, but that idea that it sort of permeates so many things, the idea of sort of students of all ages and people being kind of workforce ready. And what I love about this event, if you've been listening to all our interviews, I feel like I keep repeating it, is the idea of sort of the intersecting, kind of constituencies and stakeholders that are at this event. It's, it's a kind of a rarity, unfortunately, but it is that idea that I think a lot of people should and do care about this as something that it's if we can keep sort of, instilling it across, someone's kind of lifelong learning, then I think, we all benefit, more gainfully employed people and, more sort of capable workers and citizens and all these sort of, really lofty, ambitious and important goals. But again, just to make sure we're on the same page, executive functioning skills, how would you define that?
Sure. It's a great question, because honestly, it's rather new in the academic lexicon. So my first book came out 15 years ago, called That Crumpled Paper Was Due Last Week, Helping Disorganized and Distracted Boys. And there was no mention of executive functioning skills, because it's really rather a newer term that's being used in commonplace, talk in education. And it's really anything that involves concentration, focus, in order to get things done. That's an easy way of thinking about it. But the core executive functions are inhibitory control, so your ability to maintain your composure, maintain, be free from distractions, choose behaviors in the short term that align with your long-term goals. Working memory is the second, where it's really about, can you connect things from when you we're learning something a few weeks ago to something you're learning today, and can you make those creative connections and ways to understand something? So for example, a student who is learning something in math and he connects it to something they learned 3 or 4 weeks ago, that's an example of working memory. And then finally, cognitive flexibility. So that ability to adapt or change based on new information. So this is really critically important. Now, most people think about executive functions in terms of academic performance, right? So if you're able to get your work done and manage distractions. But I really want everyone to also understand how key it is for making and maintaining friendships. It's key for communication. It's key for connection. And we often overlook that. And in a time where so many schools are navigating this loneliness epidemic, this is for students and for adults. This is why it's become the cornerstone of my work and my life's work. It's like this ties into so many things that impact all of us, and yet we're not teaching it in schools. And teachers and educators would also benefit from supporting their executive functions.
Yeah, and I think there's I feel like it's interesting. There's sort of, I feel like this great kind of opportunity in this sort of moment where I feel like it's something that, students as they're going through school are kind of craving and wanting, because I feel like it's kind of part of a kind of a general bucket of people being like, oh, I want to get life skills or something, because it's oh, I'm learning this thing. When am I even going to use it, or, whatever else. But also sort of acknowledgement from higher ed leaders and workforce leaders, that idea of this is something that we should be teaching. It would make the, our students as they graduate from K through 12 or college just more relevant and impactful, workers and things. So before we get too far along with our conversation, for this event in particular, are you seeing or sensing that sort of feeling of oh, this, the stars are aligning a bit, or I guess just any immediate reflections as we're wrapping up the week. So yeah. I figure, we've got about kind of all our fill of sessions and things. So what are you sensing, hearing, seeing in this sort of realm of executive functioning skills and people who are looking to maybe find ways to implement it?
Well, that is a great question. Let me first answer the question about what I think about this week, because I want to just give a shout out. I have come for several years in a row. I make it a priority because I really believe South by Southwest EDU is this opportunity to connect across different perspectives. People here are open. They want to have conversations. They want to be learning new things and having, an expansive exposure. And I really love that. It has a soul to it. And I always learn something new or meet someone new that makes beyond the trip worthwhile. And I want to always say that because I always come in with no expectations. And I think that's what's really important about the way I approach this conference, because I look at it, I look at the schedule, I'll go to sessions, but I'll also be, impromptu meeting with people. I think that's really important. Now, to your second part of your question around executive functioning, really important question too. And it's not yet at the tipping point of understanding. And I was just talking to Greg Rosenbaum about that yesterday, because he knows this has been my life's work. And he said, this is one of the few pieces that people are talking about it. And I want to give you a highlight that relates to higher ed, because really when I first started this work and bringing the nonprofit, I started with middle school, because ninth grade grades are the biggest indicator of whether or not someone will go to college. They'll graduate from college, but if you don't have these skills in middle school, ninth grade cannot be, there's never too late, but it's better to start earlier. And I was doing this with a bunch of sixth graders, and then I'll translate it into higher ed, so don't worry. But I was doing this with a bunch of sixth graders. We were having this focus group, and these kids by the seventh week were like, so on Tuesday we have the 25-minute activity and the regroup time where we go through all our stuff, we map out our week, we do all the things. We need to have more Tuesdays. And it was such a cute comment, and it also reflects a lot of what the work we do with college students is today. Because what people don't realize is post-pandemic, my work with college students has exploded, and higher ed really needs to pay attention, because I actually was talking to a university president. He sees exactly what I see. This is a student belonging issue. This is an academic performance issue. This is a retention issue, because if students come and they can't organize, plan, prioritize, start and complete tasks, and be adaptable when things don't go as planned, it will be very hard to move forward. And a quick story before we go on about a higher ed student. So 2 years ago, I got a call from a parent. Her child was a college sophomore at a highly selective institution and was on academic probation. And as I started talking to her, and I told this story yesterday in my presentation, but as I started talking to her, I realized that this parent had done a lot of the life management schools. Like the student was struggling to get to class on time, to do their laundry, to even make sure that they were eating meals. And midway through the conversation with the parent, I said, how much of this were you doing for your child in high school? And they said, well, I assumed that going to school was their job. And so I did everything else. And now this child is in high school. It's impacting their mental well-being. And so we worked with them, and they actually really had a total transformation, literally a 180 within 9 months. And we've had that happen again and again. But the issue is I want all kids to have access. I want universities to really look at this as an issue that is key to orienting kids to campus.
Yeah. Because I was curious, like, you see, I think, like this event is one of those ones where I think you see some of the like early stage ideation and like some of like maybe the folks who are waking up to, different concepts and are receptive to having conversations versus people being like, oh, I don't know what that is, or I don't know, I don't think that that's like worthwhile, whatever. So I think I'm glad that I guess it doesn't feel like you're maybe as much as it has been in the past, like hitting a whole lot of friction or people scratching their heads, whatever. It's like people, like you're saying, like you're talking to a higher ed leader or you're,
yes.
And those sort of things. And people are like, again, they see it, they're receptive. And I think that is, there's not going to be probably just one only way that you would sort of integrate something like this into, whether it's, curriculum or co-curricular stuff. So like that would probably be the next phase where, I would hope next year, maybe some people are like submitting some sessions and, I'll manifest this for you and all of us.
I
like,
love
I think,
it.
the idea that they would be like, here's a way that we, started to do it and, some insights that we're getting from that process. Cause it feels like it could be something like, in the higher ed setting, you could kind of loop it more into sort of like the career services and kind of put it under that guise of like, well, these are things you're going to need to be like a, effective employee or, again, that's an idea of sort of like life skills sort of workshops or something. So it's like they're doing events through like student activities or something. So it's like, I'll put that call to action out there for people that it is like, there's, I think a lot of good opportunities out there to be fostering this and maybe, because I think the executive functioning skills, even that sort of vernacular is a little bit new to me. So if it's like, do you need to do that sort of rebranding? Because obviously any of the sort of like soft skill stuff, obviously I think we're all trying to figure out, it's like obviously there's
durable skills,
right?
Big, I mean, they're soft, but they're also like critical, right?
Right.
So, the final story in my latest book, Erasing the Finish Line, is about a young man named Luis. And Luis also, went to community college and then graduated from his local state school in 6 years, start to finish. And his boss actually saw me at her child's school and called me and said, this isn't my children that are struggling with these issues, but it's actually my staff member. And I really like him, but we are probably going to not be able to move him forward unless he builds these skills. Would you be willing to coach him? And it was right before the pandemic. And I was like, I don't really have time. And then the pandemic happened and everybody was at home. And she contacts me again. And I said, you know what? I'll do it. And we have worked together for 5 years. And last week update if you've read the book or you're going to read the book. But last week I got an email from her and the subject line was, we did it. He just got his 3rd promotion. And that is what keeps me going, right? So it's not that we've hit friction. It's that people don't understand that you can teach these skills, that it's not like you have them or you don't, and that we all need to become from a place of creating the time, structure, and support and not assuming young adults have these skills when they come to college. And I'll tell you why. Because not only have we had the pandemic, that depending on where students were in school or were they online for 18 months, that really impacted their development of these skills. We know the research shows 2 things. One, that stress and trauma and even lack of sleep impacts our executive functions, right? And you know that, like if you're sleep deprived, it's very hard to concentrate. It's very hard to get things done sometimes. But if you're also going through a stressful situation at home, and then we also know that students who have gone through the pandemic have likely had some form of stress. So those 2 things, you have students arriving on your campus that want to learn these skills. It gives them a sense of control. It gives them a sense of agency. And then they also are more likely to take healthy risks, to engage with their community because they are on top of things and not in an analysis paralysis, overwhelm spiral where you're getting no work done. And everybody who's worked with college students has seen that happen, and we want to prevent that.
Yeah, and even like to sort of bold circle underline the point you made, like I think we're still sort of getting past that idea that people just are like, oh, I'm just a disorganized person. And it's like, that's the fixed state. Like that's who they are, whatever. And it's like, even if you are like further in your career or, student, and I think I was drawing a parallel in my mind, that idea of what you're saying of like, just like the earlier we can make this kind of investment and everything, the better, of like, learning a second language. It's like, we like get students to be exposed to that early, like when their brain is just more kind of like malleable and everything. It's like, it's just way easier. And like, it just kind of, reframes their kind of perspective. But it's like, you can still learn a language when you're older and stuff, if you like just kind of, stick to it and everything. So it's like, you might obviously approach it in like a different sort of, framework and everything, but, it's never too late. And I think, certainly trying to find, the right inspiration or motivation for that person, because that idea of like, hey, you want to get promoted? It's like, you're going to need to be able to be more organized, because it's like, you're not going to be able to like fumble your, tasks and deadlines toward, becoming, the role that you want to be, kind of thing. So the idea of like, you got to be organized, you got to be able to prioritize, you got to be able to like get this stuff done, and just making it very practical and all that. And it's like, and we can get there. Like, you're capable. We just got to like, do the work and everything. So again, just the conversation we're having here is, again, just very comprehensive and reflective of South by EDU. So
right.
Just for kind of a quick perspective, I've been asking everyone, because certainly one of the more prominent topics is kind of the proliferation of AI and all different facets of like folks' work and everything.
Great question.
How do you see something like AI acting as a tool and or kind of a challenge for your work, kind of building these executive functioning skills?
Such an important question, because I was actually talking to somebody about this who works in the space of social capital. And we were talking about how, there are certain things that AI can be helpful for, but we do not want to outsource executive functions to AI, because we still need critical thinking skills. So whereas you could have put a list of tasks in that you need to get done, and it could schedule it out for where you do, you still need to have the critical thinking skills to realize what's really urgent and important. I'm just giving a very easy example. But the reality of it is that we cannot outsource all of this, because it's so tied to making and maintaining friendships. It's tied to, overcoming this loneliness. So if we want to scale for executive functioning being in the AI space, what we're scaling for is isolation. And we don't want that. And so where it can be helpful, absolutely. Could it potentially prioritize your emails that you should answer versus the ones that you could hold off on? Maybe. And those could be ways to think about the planning and the prioritization. So I'm not opposed to any of that. I just really want to make sure people are aware this is not a replacement to outsource all your executive functions to AI.
Yeah, that's good. Good acknowledgement. That's sort of where my head was going, is that like it can be a supplement or sort of an assistant, but it shouldn't just be like, oh, that's going to be the panacea and elixir to all my problems, is like, I'm a disorganized person. I'm just going to have AI do it all for me, and I'm not going to like question it and whatever. So as we wrap up, 2 quick questions here, if you want to kind of synthesize everything we've been talked about here. So, from your unique vantage point, what advice would you give to higher ed leaders right now?
I would really look at building an executive functioning curriculum within your college experience as a way to support student well-being, support academic school retention, and really come from a place of giving students the life skills they need for the workforce. So it's all about career readiness. It's also about career exploration, because when you have these skills, you're more likely to take healthy risks and look beyond the immediate. Look at it this way. If more students stay at your school because they have these skills, because they feel a sense of control, that's great. If students graduate from your school and then see, wow, my university really helped me build the skills I needed to thrive in the workplace, they are going to be a powerful alum. So the return on investment is huge, and that's what I'm wanting these higher ed leaders to see. This isn't a huge investment either. Like, it's honestly pretty simple in a lot of ways. And so now when I start talking to higher ed leaders and they're responsive in this way, because they've spent the time on different programs around student wellness and they've worked, but they're like, we've reached the limit there. What else do we need to help to support student well-being and success?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And because I think that is something where I've talked with folks and like, because I think just doing this work, being in the space and everything, but even like, I'm an involved alumni for my undergraduate institution. So I'm always just like curious of like, what did you get from college? Like, what was something like a big takeaway? And some of like the answers have been just being like comfort with ambiguity, that idea, kind of the like cognitive flexibility, the idea of like sort of reflecting on that now. And it's just like, that is the idea that like we would wish to instill that in our students, but it's such a like, like it feels kind of squishy, soft, whatever. But like, that idea of if you're embedding this in both, curriculum and kind of co-curricular stuff, and like saying it's important if people are, like leadership, your institution questioning it, it's all the reasons that you're saying, like it is really like we want the students that we're graduating to, have all those skills because they're going to serve them in whatever they're doing and for the long term versus it just being like, something that kind of has more of like an expiration date. So final question, curious, because it's been something we definitely have asked everyone. What is on the horizon for your work that you're kind of keeping an eye on now that maybe you could, encourage other folks to kind of be anticipating?
Well, right now, we're really in the early stages of the work we've done to develop this curriculum. We have developed the curriculum for middle school, high school, and we're actually currently working on the college piece. And that's the work that we've been doing with this university. And so I would love for people to get in touch if that's of interest to them, because at the very first stage, especially with a school like this, what we're doing is we're going and visiting and actually talking to all their faculty. And it's because faculty are asking for this. Students are showing up in their class different than 10 or 15 years ago. And faculty are like, how do we help them thrive? And how do we help ourselves as instructors, as teachers, be the best that we can be? And so I go in and present, and my team goes in and presents. And it's really actually, again, not a big, overwhelming thing, but these little strategies, these little shifts make a big difference. So that's what I want higher ed leaders to know is that they can really bring this to their campus rather easily, and little shifts can make a big difference.
Yeah, it's great to hear. Yeah, they're helping to, build that toolkit for folks, because like just that idea of, I think a lot of people, again, now probably being responsive and open to this sort of conceptually, but then it's like, well, how do we, how do we like kind of get started somewhere? And so I'm glad that you are making yourself be of support in this and, equipping them with what they need. Just appreciate you take some time out at the end of the week to be on this episode, and we'll have ways to connect with you and your work in the show notes. But just thanks again for all that you shared.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you'll like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, the leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.